Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak broadly regarding the subject matter of Senate Bill 377, the Preservation of Religious Freedom Act. I'm going to start by just telling you the principal reason I got involved in politics, going back to my days in student government, has been to give those who were being bullied a voice. Whether that bullying took the form of physical abuse, as it did back then, or more recently by the use of money or position in politics to force one's way, even when they did not have the best argument. I have tried during my 3.5 years in this role to counter that sort of bullying. In many ways, this drove my interest in the gift limitation law and other ethics in government initiatives. If the playing field could be leveled, I thought there would be a better chance for the merit of the idea rather than the identity of its supporter to carry the day. We have certainly seen a lot of bullying, misinformation, and downright untruths with respect to this issue over the last several days. I want to be clear that hasn't come from anyone in this chamber. We've had a very reasoned debate. I appreciated the input from the senator from the 39th in our committee hearing on this subject, but we have had a lot of misinformation outside of this chamber. Before I get into the substance of my remarks, I want to recognize the work of my friend, the gentleman from the 37th across the way, who has carried similar legislation in the House and has treated the opposition to this common sense proposal with far more restraint than I could manage. He is a credit to this General Assembly, and I'm proud to serve with him. I said from this well not long ago that there is a war going on against people of faith in this country, and I think the evidence of that war is manifest. Simply the fact that we had to bring forward legislation this session so school children and those employed in our public schools could be allowed to say Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah. Evidence abounds that the last group of people in America it is okay to pick on are people of faith. I felt that instead of continuing to deal with these issues in piecemeal, how about providing a defense to people of every faith who face a government that routinely is hostile toward fundamental freedom of conscience interests? And so almost a year ago, I began to research religious freedom restoration acts around the country and brought forward Senate Bill 377, which I believe robustly protects Georgians without creating any so-called right to discriminate. There's a very loud but small minority who either wishes to remain willfully ignorant of the plain language of this legislation, or worse, is intentionally misleading the public as to what this legislation does. So let me spend just a moment talking to you about this proposal and why it is needed. A state religious freedom restoration act is the single most important step we can take as state legislators to comprehensively protect freedom of conscience. In the absence of these laws, any government action that is not outright persecution of religion is presumptively legal. Under a law like Senate Bill 377, the presumption shifts. As President Bill Clinton put it in signing the federal law on which this proposal is modeled, quote, "The government should be held to a very high level of proof before it interferes with someone's free exercise of religion." In legal terminology, when the government burdens the free exercise of religion, it must show it has a compelling government interest and that it is using the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. We're not plowing new ground here. 18 states, including all of the states that border Georgia, have passed a similar law. 11 more states have state Supreme Court decisions that apply equivalent protections. So let me talk for just a moment about how those protections work in the real world. Several years ago, a city in Texas tried to prevent a pastor from operating a prisoner reentry program for nonviolent offenders out of his church. They threatened him with civil fines and eventually criminal penalties. He won his case before the Texas Supreme Court, relying on a law very similar to Senate Bill 377. He would have lost without it. Last year, a Florida community college had a class assignment about the human experience of revulsion, part of which required the students to stomp on a picture of Jesus. One religious student objected, and the university initiated disciplinary proceedings, not against the teacher, but against the student. When his attorneys contacted the school's attorneys, the relevant legal authority was Florida's Religious Freedom Restoration Act. How could the school really have a compelling interest in forcing this student to stomp on a picture of Jesus? The school backed down. Last year, Father Francisco Naho testified before the Nevada legislature on a law similar to this one. One of his parishioners was locked up on a suspected immigration violation, and Father Naho was summarily and totally denied access to pray and counsel with this frightened member of his flock. No explanation, no reason, because as he told the committee, the authorities had no legal duty to consider the religious interest at stake. A final case. A minister in Georgia was told when his church was building a worship center at a new location, there were whispers that the ministry to the less fortunate would bring the wrong kind of people into the area. The center was built, but not without a grueling bureaucratic wrestling match. Now, this act would not give churches license to locate anywhere, but it would require government to treat houses of worship on an equal basis of secular facilities of similar size and scope. 3 of these 4 examples didn't even involve a lawsuit. If you've ever dealt with a government bureaucracy, you know they can be stubborn and arbitrary, especially when they hold all the cards. This law redeals the cards. It gives people of faith the right to have government take burdens on their religion seriously. In most cases, this avoids litigation. All of my examples involve believers who are easy to root for, but what about those who we simply can't root for? Put another way, and this is an important question, can someone use this law to evade justice if he says his religious beliefs support discrimination or domestic violence? I want to be clear on the answer. No, absolutely not. We now have a 20-year record with this law in federal and state courts. No bigot and no violent offender has ever evaded justice with these laws. If they had, you would be certain that the law's opponents would bring those cases to your attention. This isn't just my opinion. I put a letter on your desks yesterday, a letter signed by 14 of the nation's leading First Amendment and religion law legal scholars. They strongly endorse Senate Bill 377 and rebut the notion that this proposal is somehow different from other similar laws in ways that will lead to injustice. As these scholars make clear, very few of the laws we will ever consider here will be as much of a known quantity as this one. No human-made law will ever achieve perfect justice. But if one of you says, what if this or that happens, read the letter before you and ask yourself, has your hypothetical ever happened anywhere as a result of these laws? I want to put on the record today, right now, that to allay any further concerns that I believe are unwarranted as to the current language of the bill, I am willing to offer a floor amendment adjusting the language slightly to comport more closely with the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which I believe would resolve any remaining objections anyone could have. I can't promise you that every exercise of religion this law protects is one that you will agree with, but that's a point in the law's favor. We need to protect the freedom of religion for the same reason we protect freedom of speech. These rights don't need protection until they are unpopular with someone who has the power to punish. This impacts members of all faiths. In our diverse nation, everyone is a religious minority in one place or another. All of our great social movements, from women's suffrage to the civil rights movement, were led by people of faith whose convictions were initially unpopular until they ended up on the right side of history. Protecting, not punishing, religious freedom is on the right side of history. Senate Bill 377 is the single best way you can accomplish that. And shame on us if we allow this sacred body to be bullied into inaction on this vitally important issue to protect the first freedom of Georgians, the freedom that brought so many of our forebears to these shores in the first place, the freedom to exercise our faith without intrusion from the government. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator.